Right, we are on episode 6, training groups. So, Cyrus, can you tell me a little bit, like, what is a training group and, how does that work? Can you explain that?
Well, our club, we have 3 hours to practice.
Okay. The total, that's how long we have to
that's what we rent.
There's no one kid in there for 3 hours.
No. Okay. Nobody's training for 3 hours. We rent the pool for 3 hours. And we break it into essentially five ability levels.
Okay.
Within 3 hours. So we have our beginning level is the 10 and under development.
Okay.
Or 10 and under novice. And that is for, swimmers coming into the team 10 and under that are, first safely swimming, but trying the sport for the first time. Pretty large percentage of our team, obviously, people trying it out for the first time. And so they have their own coach, 10 and under. And then the next development level is 11 and over. And that is for high school, middle school, little bit older and later to try out the sport.
Okay.
But we want a place for everybody to succeed. So we have another coach for them. And, between those two levels, we're talking about 30-ish% of the team.
Okay.
Of our membership fall into those two practice sessions. So that is generally where our waiting list begins, because we've had as many as 70 in that group, and about 70 is about a max load for 8 lanes of rental. So we want a safe experience and a fun experience for everybody coming to practice, and at 2 times a week, it's a perfect number there with the 70 is where the waiting list starts on that development.
Okay.
But the moving on from go for it.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, you're still explaining the groups? Or okay. I was going to say, so we've got all these different groups. How do kids move up within those groups? I mean, you start as a little guy, 6 or whatever, and we've got these, 18-year-old high school kids. How does that progression look? What determines when a kid is ready to move from one group to the other?
Good question. So our development levels, we are looking for, it's coach assessment move ups. So we're, as a coaching staff, we're assessing your swimmers, and you're welcome to, set aside a meeting time with me, generally between 5 and 6 p.m. on most weekdays. Mm-hmm. You can email me, cyrus@truckeeswim.org, and we can set up a day to meet to discuss, where your swimmer is at. But in general, we're talking development. We want, first and foremost, we're looking for, safe swimming, circle swimming, which falls under circle swimming, entering the pool correctly, not cannonballing on your teammate or
seems like
diving into shallow water or all that stuff. Yeah. But after the safe, we're looking for kicking positions, 6 kicking positions. So that's just not kicking with a kickboard, but that's kicking on your front, kicking on your side, which tells them to kick through their body, starts teaching them how to kick correctly, kicking on the back, breaststroke on the back, breaststroke on the front, butterfly on the back, butterfly on the front.
Okay, cool.
So we have six kicking positions. We have another 6 streamlining positions. That's hands in front of the head. And those are really the keys to where my philosophy stands. And it's interesting that I have had the experience where I've had what I would call a development swimmer come in for an assessment. And yes, they can splash through the 4 competitive strokes. But when I get into the basics of those kicking positions and those fundamental streamline positions, especially, they're lacking in that skill set because of a program that may or may not have focused on that. And I believe that ingraining those core fundamentals of the sport, especially when we're talking about a 10 and under, if they can come out of that my 10 and under program with good kicking skills, good streamlining skills, I'm setting them up for success through the rest of our levels.
Interesting. Okay.
So it is a little frustrating at times that, oh, well, my child can already swim really fast freestyle. I realize that, and I want them to even do better later. I want them to be at the best they can be. And
so there's more to it than just speed.
There's more to it than the 4 strokes. There's more to it than just speed. So that first development progression is a lot of fundamental streamlining and kicking positions. And then we get into a little bit with competitive starts, safely jumping off, diving off the blocks, and backstroke starts, of course. Those are under the USA swimming guidelines. But, those fundamentals of streamline and kicking, in my opinion, are very keys to moving up out of development.
What about, so we've talked, this is super interesting, by the way. I've
Yeah.
known you a long time. I haven't quite heard this laid out. So what if a kid has these fundamentals down, but from a maturity standpoint, isn't ready to listen,
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that a factor as well?
Yeah, so we do. We've had some very fast 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds, and very rarely do they meet all of the check marks to move up to pre-senior. At most, we can move them up to the next development level with the older kids. So it's almost the same curriculum, but they're getting a little more density. They're in the water for a full hour, whereas the 10 and unders are in the water for 45 minutes. So they're getting another 15 minutes of density. They're getting a little bit of introduction to aerobic work, where we're going to put a little interval on small sets, but we might do 10 25s or something.
Okay.
And so there is a little graduation there for that, remarkable 8 to 10-year-old, and they do come along.
Right.
I've had one example in the last 8 years here where I had a 9-10-year-old ready for pre-senior.
Wow.
And he went up there and he's done just fine there. But
and he was mature enough to do
he listens remarkably well. He works really hard. He's very fast. He's set multiple team records. And he actually broke a lot of our current Olympic trialist Luke Rodart. Broke a bunch of Luke Rodart's breaststroke records.
Wow.
Walker.
Yeah.
So he's the rare exception where he had those fundamentals of kicking, he had those fundamentals of streamlining, definitely had the speed and the 4 strokes, and he could listen to a full practice, and the hour and a half at pre-senior was not too much.
Yeah.
So it is all coaching assessment based on that core curriculum through the development process, how you move up. And it's easy to set up a meeting and talk individually about that with parents, and talk about where their swimmer's at and what they need to do to move up. Whether it's just listening more in practice, or whether it's, hey, we gotta slow down when we're kicking. Let's think about where the feet are at, referring to my body line,
Right.
etc.
One thing I was going to touch on, because I remember, when my kids were going through move-ups, it's kind of a big deal. Like, sometimes your friends move up before you do.
Yeah.
And I remember, that was kind of disappointing for my kids at the time. I think if you ask them now, they might not even remember it. I mean, so sometimes I think these move-ups can feel like a really big deal at the time. But in this long journey that is your swimming career, don't you feel like this is not something to get too hung up on? You're going to move, you stick with it, you're going to move up eventually.
Absolutely, Dan. Yes. Yeah. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Absolutely true. It's amazing how different abilities and maturity and everything plays into that youth development. And it's almost, I refer to the warp wall obstacle course, right? Everybody can run up to the beginning of the curve.
Right.
And some of them might get there lickety split in a month or 2 months.
Right.
Some might take 2 years. But at 15, 16, if they've all been swimming the same amount of time, there's going to be a lot of them banging into each other. Yeah, and so it's just the nature of the sport in that it is a marathon, not a sprint. And learning these fundamentals are going to happen at different ability levels.
Yeah,
based on age, just overall natural ability to learn something, not necessarily be there's some coordination, but coordination can be learned.
Yeah.
Right? And we're learning it, we're drilling it every day. So yeah, it's really not something to get too hung up on. I know it's hard, and it's hard as a kid, especially, as a developing kid. And it gets really hard, especially when we're talking about that age from 10 to 15. That's a tough time. I mean, the biological differences are not 1 year. They can be 3 years.
Right.
It's crazy. It's really a tough time. So it's really good not to get hung up on it. And if there is stress or anxiety about development, that's a time to set up a meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.